Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Black Health Trust. We are so happy that you chose to spend some time with us. We've been looking forward to spending time with you. And as usual, there is no dearth of topics that deserve some attention this week. Our topic today is COVID-19, Where Are We? Which is a fairly open-ended title, but it definitely describes the situation I think that we find ourselves in. Without further ado, I turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara Neighbor Stevens. Thank you, Dr. Ivan Walks and Dr. Jocelyn Hines. They are our co-moderators for these sometimes rough and tumble discussions. I have been absent for a few Sundays for some, I hope, well-deserved rest. But in that period of time, I did decide, Dr. Gibson, I want to do a program with you on pharmacology of certain medications that we may not be aware of that can have significant effects on your health care. So for almost 2+ years, we have been very polite in talking about things that we should do, information given to us by what we consider credible sources, vetted information given by physicians, largely from the National Medical Association, but not exclusively, physicians who publish, physicians who are academic, physicians who are practicing in their communities. And we've had a tug with certain other groups of physicians' information, in particular those doctors who claim to be functional doctors. Now, I'm a functional doctor myself in some regards, and that I've trained at A4M and a number of things, but then there's some things that are just a hoax. And I think in the light that there's so many people over the past years, 2 years plus, that have shown up in emergency rooms based upon being sick from COVID, some of them critically ill, some not recoverable, because they listened to bad information that is killing them. Let's show the first slide, Simon, if you would, please. So my oldest son, who is now almost a half century old, when he was a child, my wife was very modern in raising children. She did not believe in the corporal punishment that me and Ivan got when we were young. But one day he exasperated her so much that she said, "I'm taking the gloves off, no more Mr. Nice Guy." And I think that part of what we have to do is our common sense doctrine, the fact that we not only give information, but we're interested in protecting our communities. We have to give defensive positions against people who we think are against our community. Recently, I went to Puerto Rico, and a company involved in private equity and funding that project of purchase was going to come to Puerto Rico. And I said, "You're welcome to come, love to see you." But our units are closed off to anybody who is unvaccinated and not tested 48 hours before coming. He says, "Oh, that's just baloney. I'm not vaccinated, I'm still coming." I was thinking at that point, that was attempted murder, that somebody was so greedy for money that he would travel to Puerto Rico where the incidence of COVID was high, the people are vulnerable, and say that he was not going to respect our rules of protecting our patients. Next slide. So who is against us? We've heard of a group called America's Frontline Doctors. One of their key prescribers was stripped of all licenses. I won't give her name, but she's Dr. Her initials are AC. She was prescribing ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine against and advising against vaccinations for COVID-19. These types of actions have led to thousands of patients showing up critically ill in hospitals nationwide. Next slide, please. So beware that there are a lot of new businesses that have developed since we've been holed up in our homes, especially telemedicine. And I do telemedicine myself, and most doctors do telemedicine, but we had to be aware of who's doing it. In January of 2021, documents from the Alabama State Board of Medicine showed evidence that the doctors related to a Utah-based telemedicine company called Bronson Medical, whose owner was Andrew McCubbins. He had previously pled guilty to federal healthcare fraud charges. And what he was using on his platform was nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, supposedly supervised by physicians across the country, to give medically unnecessary orders for genetic cancer screening, for erectile dysfunction medications, for all sorts of things, which are legitimate in their own right, but they require a certain amount of medical legitimate oversight so you don't kill somebody. Well, this platform was also being used by these America's doctors, whoever these people are. And they largely use this, and I want to call them out as being fraudulent. We've had some of them join us for our Wednesday night meetings, and a few of them have even made it in limited place on some of our Sunday meetings. But I'm calling them out. We have determined, based upon the review of our subcommittees, that the use of ivermectin, the use of hydroxychloroquine, and a number of these things are harmful to people in our community. We reviewed evidence from the National Medical Association, who's reviewed evidence from the FDA, from all of the relevant boards, and we stand by what we have been talking about all of this time. And Dr. Walks has graciously handled the committee, that our task force that went over those. And Dr. Barbara has staunchly said we have to use common sense. But we are hoping that many people will heed our advice not to follow this kind of medicine. And what has sort of lit my fuse, that some of my favorite people, who are supposedly very intelligent people, have showed up positive this week, because God did not tell them specifically to take the vaccine, that God told them in a dream not to take the vaccine, and now they're sick, and now they're even refusing to take some of the, I'll call it the morning after pills and some of the monoclonal antibodies. We just have a gross outbreak of people listening to the wrong information. And it really has bothered me. So Dr. Neighbor, Dr. Walks, I don't know if it's bothered you, but the floor is open before we go to the next set of slides. I'm just totally upset with this disinformation coming from that side of the table and harming communities of color.
I'll start off by saying that every situation, or just about in every situation where there's a chance to make money or profit, you're going to find a pimp. And I call these the COVID pimps. But we have them in every situation.
So Dr. Maxey, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, Your earlier slide, Dr. Maxey, said that some of these folks had their medical licenses taken away, which means that before they were caught, before they were being held accountable, they had medical licenses. We tell people, and rightfully so, we tell people to talk to your physician. We almost always, with any medical situation, we tell folks to talk to your physician. We tell folks to get a primary care practitioner that can get to know them and from whom they can take advice. And that's what makes this so troubling, is that the folks that all of us are sending people to for help are, as Dr. Nabert Stevens just said, they're not trustworthy. They're taking advantage. And I personally feel sad about this, because we really don't have any place else to send people. We have to send people to their doctors and to the folks to whom they seek primary care and they seek medical advice. And that makes it absolutely incumbent upon us to do what you're doing today, Dr. Maxey, which is to call these people out, which is to name some names so that folks know that, yes, we're telling you to talk to your doctor. And at the same time, we're telling you to be aware that not every single doctor or practitioner out there is someone that you can trust. So it's not just go to your doctor and do what they say. It's go to your doctor and stay informed yourself. Black Health Trust on Sundays, other kinds of trusted, vetted information for you is important in addition to talking to your doctor. That's what I've got, Dr. Maxey, but I'm sad about it. I'm heartbroken about the fact that at a time like this, when literally hundreds of thousands of people in our country have died from this and millions around the world, that folks still think, oh, this is a good time to go make a buck. It's sad.
I listened last night to the White House news correspondents dinner that had President Biden at, and the comedian from South Africa, what's his name,
Trevor Noah.
Trevor Noah, who is absolutely brilliant. And and one of the things, he spared no prisoners. He called everybody out, but in particular, when he got to the Fox News network, he said the whole crew is here and they're all vaccinated and boosted, but they'll tell you the vaccine is a hoax. But when it comes to their life, they protect it. But let's go to the next slide, Simon. I'll get off my soapbox. Let's go to the next slide. So we've talked about this before. What is being fully vaccinated? Full vaccination based upon the CDC definition of positive tests, 14 days post second dose of either Pfizer or J&J or Moderna. That is fully vaccinated. It does not include boosted. And then partially vaccinated includes patients who received only one shot from either Pfizer, BioNTech, or Moderna. So if you've only received one shot, you're only partially vaccinated. Now, we suggested, based upon what Dr. Nabert said a few weeks ago, that we believe that you're fully protected once you've been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, as defined here, plus boosted. So I don't want to have a disagreement on this, but I tell them I'm going to take every recommendation into my arm. So I've had the first booster and the second booster. And we're going to talk about some of this as we go along. Let's go to the next slide. So Recent studies have compared the Delta and Omicron, that Omicron was more likely to cause a breakthrough infection from vaccinated individuals. And we've even had to re-understand, what does the term breakthrough mean? We know that vaccines don't necessarily prevent you from getting an infection, but they hopefully will mitigate any downstream effects of that infection so you get less sick from them. Now, it was also shown that admissions were less frequent, and the admitted patients might develop disease comparable to Delta, even with Omicron. But we know that efforts for reducing Omicron transmission are required, as the admission rates might be lower. But there's an increased number of infections, and therefore hospitalizations might in fact be higher, and therefore a large number of people might have bad effects. So let's just discuss on this for a few moments what these recent studies are showing. And I open the floor to Dr. Nabert and Dr. Walks, and how we interpret this to our listeners about what's going on with Delta. And we know that Delta was largely replaced in the population by Omicron. And I think they started to open up planes and restaurants thinking that the pandemic was over. But to my understanding and what I see in my own practice every day is that people are still getting sick. Even though with Omicron, most of the sicknesses are less acute, but there are still acute infections that go on.
Well, I would like to start this with the perspective that, and we've talked about this before as well, that there is science, and we have to understand that science is not a static set of facts or information. It is an ever-evolving, ever-changing body of information that changes because of new information and new experience. We had no real experience at the beginning of this whole thing, and we have been learning as we go. And as a result, now 2 years out, we have the opportunity to look back and see that we we did make some mistakes in the way things were discussed or framed. And unfortunately, I believe we are still making some mistakes. One of those mistakes that we made was focusing, in my opinion, focusing way too much on what was going on with COVID-19 in the United States, and not from the very beginning understanding that it had not simply come to the United States. In fact, I don't think started in the United States. But we focused all of our attention and thinking around that and ignored the worldwide experience. As a result of that, when we start talking about the pandemic, we tend to only take into consideration our local experience and not the worldwide experience. And then thirdly, we did not understand that this is an illness that has does not really discriminate on who it might visit. Depending on the host or the patient, they may have a variety of responses to the infection, but coronavirus 19 does not care where you live or what job you have or not, and really how old you are. So with these very incomplete understandings of what was happening, we have gotten to the point now where we don't think about anybody else, anywhere else but ourselves and what we want to do personally. And we have taken the public health part out of it. By and large, in my opinion, it has been replaced by politics. And so the move to take the mask off on the airplanes and to encourage resumption of in-office work and all the other ways that the previous protective moves that were made have been lifted, have left us now in a situation where we are going to continue to see surges. They may not extend across the whole country, but we will definitely see local surges based on what particular variant is taken up in a particular location. Upstate New York is having a significant problem with a new variant. It's been reported in other places. And we all know, thanks to the education we've received, that we're going to continue to see variants and we're going to be living with this. And so, and I'm going to come back to this later, we are going to have to understand what we need to do and practice it and not rely on statements that are made that may have and probably do have agendas attached to them. I'm trying to be very diplomatic in what I'm saying, but I think I'm getting my point across.
So Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, Dr. Maxey, I'm so happy that you all are more diplomatic because we need balance. And so while you all are being diplomatic, let me be a little bit less diplomatic. I'm looking at your slide, Dr. Maxey, and I'm reading words like more likely to cause and might develop and might be lower. Look, I'm just going to say this straight, okay? It's nice to understand what the statistics show. It's nice to understand what the relative risk is. All that's really important. And it's important for us because we have to make public health decisions in our communities. Me, as an individual, one of the things I say to my patients when they ask me, they say, well, Dr. Walsh, you told me to look up the medication you prescribed. And I looked at it and it said that may cause weight loss. And then below that, it said may cause weight gain. And then it said may cause sleepiness. And then it said may cause insomnia. Which of those is it? And I say to them, I will defend to the death your right to be an individual. And I tell patients that about almost everything because statistics are great and really, really smart people like Dr. Maxey and Dr. Neighbor-Stevens understand all about how to calculate statistics. And at the end of the day, your body is going to respond the way your body is going to respond. And all of these things about more likely to and less frequent, I know people that are young, 30s and 40s, without pre-existing conditions, that Omicron has hit and hit hard. And they're having ongoing challenges. You know, we think, well, what about the famous people? Okay, Senator Tim Kaine was on TV this week talking about how Omicron has hit him and stayed for months and months and months and months and over a year. So every time I look at these recent studies that show, well, this is going to be less frequent or this is going to be less likely, and people are opening movie theaters and airplanes and everything else. I had some folks come to my home, good friends of mine I've known for decades. They were out a few days before they came to my home. And while they were at my home, they started getting a little bit sick. And it turned out that they tested positive and they had coronavirus. So got my prescription pad out. Actually, I didn't. I got on the phone, called the pharmacy, ordered them some Paxlovid. They took it for the whole 5-day course. They were better in a couple of days, and they were fine. But you know what else I had on in my house? I had one of Mr. Dorsey's machines on, and they got sick. I didn't get sick. I've been vaccinated. I've been boosted. I've been boosted again. We've had a lot of doctors on, Dr. Maxey, Dr. Nabrit Stevens, that have told us about the additional vitamin C, the additional vitamin D, the vitamin A. My wife said, why do you have that big old handful of pills? How do you take all those pills every day? I said, I'm not trying to get sick, hon. And so she's taking a handful of pills. It's important for us to look at all of these studies and at the end of the day, be selfish. Be selfish about protecting your health. Be selfish, like Dr. Maxey was, about protecting the patients that he's responsible for in Puerto Rico. I'm sorry I'm not a better scientist, and I don't care as much as other people do about all of these statistics. All I know for sure is that there's something in our community that's killing people, a lot more people that look like me. And I'm going to do everything I can to protect myself and to protect my family. I'm going to keep that machine turned on that's killing the viruses in the air. I'm going to wear my mask. I'm going to take my extra vitamins. Like Dr. Maxey said, every time they say booster, I'm going to jump and get in line. I don't understand why people believe that somehow because they're tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of talking about it and hearing about it, but somehow they're safer just because they're tired of hearing about it. I read this week that there was a 40% increase in infections in Los Angeles. So I don't know what else to tell people, Dr. Maxey, except that be selfish, protect yourself.
Would you read those last two paragraphs on this slide out loud, if you don't mind, where it says admissions were less frequent?
The last two bullets, admissions were less frequent. Admitted patients might develop severe disease comparable to Delta.
Right there, hold on. So that means even though they're saying this stuff is more infectious but less treacherous, they're saying it can be as bad as Delta. So that's the key word in there to me. And what's the next one?
Hold on, Dr. Maxey. I feel like I'm in Bible study where the pastor tells you to read the verse, and then they say, "Stop right there." And so
I've been trained by Dr. Pointer.
It is Sunday afternoon. So
I want you to stop right there, because although you did not include this in your presentation of recent studies, I don't want this to be missed. And that is, even though the Omicron variants have been attributed to having less severe disease, what has been demonstrated now is that when you start having your surge, the hospitalizations, which means people are sick enough to go in the hospital, have been children. So I don't want that point to be missed.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
But, go ahead, Dr. Moss, if you don't mind.
No. You're full of Dr. Maxey. Efforts for reducing Omicron transmission are required as the admission rates might be lower. The increased number of infections can cause large numbers of hospitalizations.
That's very important. Very important. So just the sheer numbers are going to give you a lot of people who are severely ill. So this is not less of a challenge to us. It's more of a challenge, as both you and Dr. Nabrit have said. Let's go to the next slide, Simon, if you don't mind. So what are some of the implications? So since we're having Bible study, Dr. Walker, would you mind you read so beautifully?
No, Dr. Maxey, I'm happy to read because this is important. And I think that some people are visual learners, and I'm glad we have the slides up so they can see them. And some people listen better when they're taking in information. So absolutely. Implications of available evidence. Omicron was more likely than Delta to cause breakthrough infections in fully vaccinated and boosted vaccinated individuals. That's the first bullet.
Can I
The sec-
stop you right there? That's
Yes,
one
ma'am.
of those words that
But I think we had to go through a couple of them, so I think it may be.
well, but on this very first one that you're addressing breakthrough,
That's you got to
see,
get to the
that
second
is a
bullet.
problem right there.
Go to the second bullet though first. Go to the
Okay.
second bullet.
I agree with Dr. Neighbor Stevens because we are using words that are ill-defined or misused sometimes. Anyway, second bullet. However, these infections were less likely to result in admission or ICU level of care.
Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Neighbor.
I've said what I had to say. We should
Okay.
not
All
be
right.
using the term breakthrough because
But
that's
that-
not what it is.
But that's used in the literature, and that's what people are going to read. So we have to.
And we need to educate them as to what they should really be taking away. If those who've been with us from the early days will recall, when we first started having conversations about the soon to be released vaccines, I pressed one of our speakers because I thought it was being communicated in a confusing way exactly what the vaccines were going to do. The vaccines, although people wanted them to prevent infection, they were never, ever considered to be able to prevent infection. So that is why breakthrough is such a poor choice of words.
Okay.
Vaccines were never able to deliver the promise of no infection.
Okay, let's go down to the slide titled data, Simon, and we'll come back to this one. Okay, so now in this slide, there's some language that I wanted Dr. Neighbor to comment on. Just read the first two bullets if you don't mind, Dr. Neighbor.
Okay, I gotta move my people. Okay, data suggests Omicron infected patients are less likely to develop severe disease when compared to Delta infected patients.
In the next one?
Yet we show that Omicron is associated with more infections in fully booster vaccinated individuals, likely due to immune evasion.
So now that's the point there. What is immune evasion?
Well, as Dr. Despani so beautifully described it, and I don't know that I can recreate his imaging, but you've got the virus who has mutated so that the properties of the vaccine that decrease the ability of the infection when the vaccine was created against Delta has now mutated so that it has a new way to evade the antibodies. It's sort of like a whack-a-mole kind of situation.
And that is true. But the other interpretation of this, that this was being less vulnerable to the vaccine itself. So it was an actual evasion, not just a mutation. That's the point of the slide. But let's go back up to the previous slide, Simon.
But that still doesn't mean that it's a breakthrough if it was never meant to keep you from being infected in the first place.
Okay, go back to the previous slide. Okay, Simon. Okay, on the implications. So where'd you stop reading, Doctor?
So we read the first two and we have the third one to go.
Okay, if you go ahead with that, Dr. Stevens.
Omicron was more likely than Delta to cause breakthrough infections in fully vaccinated and booster vaccinated individuals. However, these infections were less likely to result in admission or ICU level of care. Admitted patients with Omicron infections had similar requirements for supplemental oxygen and ICU level of care compared to patients admitted with Delta infections. There's something missing there, but fully vaccinated and samples from patients who received booster vaccination.
So my interpretation of what this is saying, that with Omicron, they still required as much, is it the same level or less level of oxygen requirements?
It was similar requirements is what the statement says.
Okay.
Can I say that a little bit differently, Dr. Maxey?
Yes.
You can have a COVID infection with Delta or a COVID infection with Omicron. Maybe you won't get sick and need to go into the hospital with Delta. Maybe you won't get sick and need to go into the hospital with Omicron. In fact, if it's Omicron, you're less likely to need to get into the hospital. However, if you wind up in the hospital, in the ICU, whichever one you have, you're going to be pretty sick and you're going to require a similar level of oxygen and care, whether you have Omicron or Delta.
Exactly.
So what I take that to mean is I should not be walking around saying, well, if I get sick, it's going to be Omicron and I'm going to be fine. No, the available evidence is telling you that even if it's Omicron that you have, you can wind up in the ICU needing oxygen and being very sick.
Excellent. So that brings to the point that you mentioned a drug before called Paxlovid. So I've seen many people in the past week that have exposure and tested positive on the rapid test. And I have consistently advised them, and I hate to use the word, I call it the morning after pill. I know that's a different.
That is different, Dr. Maxey. That's a different kind of infection. So let's just move on from calling it that.
Okay, but Paxlovid is one of those, and I believe there's another one that ends in Vir, and or the monoclonal antibody. What's our advice to our audience? If you've been vaccinated, if you've been boosted, but you still end up with testing positive, meaning that your rapid test, which is an antigenic test, has tested positive, and you are having some clinical symptoms, such as upper respiratory tract infection, fever, and other things, what do we recommend that people do?
The recommendation is that you try to get your hands on Paxlovid. And to facilitate that, it was announced this week that they are launching their test and treat sites around the country where you can come in if you think you are sick with COVID, get tested, and if you're positive, get your Paxlovid right there where you are and not have to go anywhere else.
Now, there's a 5-day window, right?
Of symptoms, yes.
That you must, within 5 days of testing positive, get the Paxlovid.
It's actually within 5 days.
The time starts with the onset of symptoms. The 5 days starts with the onset of symptoms.
Okay.
And the one thing I'll add, Dr. Maxey, to the what I said earlier is that it wasn't easy a few weeks ago to find the Paxlovid. I had to call several pharmacies, and I called one national pharmacy chain, and I was told that, we didn't get Paxlovid. They only sent it to certain pharmacies. And when they told me which pharmacies they sent it to, I was not surprised, but I was unhappy to learn that those pharmacies were in certain zip codes where a lot of folks that looked like me didn't live.
Is that called redlining? Is that redlining?
It's called unavailable. That's what it's called. The Paxlovid was not available at that time in certain communities. And I read the same thing Dr. Neighbor Stevens read about it becoming more available now. I actually had read an article a week or two ago about how folks were disappointed that people were not using Paxlovid and they were not prescribing Paxlovid. So maybe all of that is going to be better this week with that news you just gave, Dr. Neighbor Stevens.
Now, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, a few months ago, you gave an excellent talk on monoclonal antibodies. Can you talk about that and how that fits in the picture if Paxlovid is unavailable? I sent a patient yesterday to get Paxlovid and it was not available. So we had to redirect him to get monoclonal antibodies.
Well, the bar is higher for the monoclonal antibody treatment. Connected to that was let me just say that this week, remdesivir, under the brand name of Veklury, was approved for use in children from 28 days of age or around 7 pounds up, which is the first one that's been approved for use in kids. But it is a injected treatment, an injectable treatment. And the criteria for it is the same as for adults. They've got to either be hospitalized or at a very high rate risk of serious complications. And usually the adults are expected to be on oxygen. So these treatments are still considered treatments for the more severe situation. What I would encourage everyone to consider Paxlovid, and right now it's the main one that is effective against Omicron, by the way. They've removed the other three. And I'm sure if I'm incorrect on that, Dr. Gibson will correct me. But unfortunately, the thing is about Paxlovid is you have to be persistent, if not aggressive, as Dr. Walks was. You can't take the first no and then throw up your hands. You need it, track it down, and get it.
What do we know anything about the cost of Paxlovid as well as the immunoglobulin?
It's supposed to be free.
It is. It is.
Right
there's
now.
There's no cost.
But whether or not it stays free depends on whether or not that package gets approved in Congress.
Now, the patient I had yesterday, I sent for the monoclonal antibody. And I was told that it was going to cost him $893 for that thing. I said, but he's Medicare, they cover it. He said, they do, but you have to have clearance from Medicare or approval from Medicare. So I have to get him approved. Do you know how we do that? And what should a patient do faced with an $893 infusion bill?
Well, those are two questions. The first question is, if they go to the hospital or the health center where remdesivir is available, that is, you have to go to those places. Most practices do not provide remdesivir. When you go to the designated places, they know how to get the prior authorization necessary to get the drug covered.
Now, I was told that I had to get it. I talked with the infusion center. First of all, the hospital was no longer making these available. They said, we don't do it. It slows our workflow. So this has been kicked out now, at least here in Southern California, to infusion centers, private ventures and urgent care centers. But the major hospitals don't seem to be carrying it here. So
this is another example of how we do not have a uniform system around this. This is very different in different parts of the country. And like with other things that we've talked about, you really have to find out what is true in your neck of the woods.
Excellent. So word to the wise, find these out. Like many people before they go on a trip to New York or Tennessee, or they go to the AAA and get a map made out. So just like an emergency route in your house, how to get out on the fire, even though you don't have COVID, you may not expect to get COVID. You should have a plan for your family if somebody does get infected and not wait until the last minute to figure out what's it going to cost, where you're going to go. So you need to have some family information, as Dr. Neighbor says, of what's relevant for your neck of the woods, how you should handle, be prepared. Okay. Let's go to the, let's talk about this supplemental oxygen in just a moment. That supplemental oxygen is needed from a pathophysiological way because if you're infected and you've had release of the cytokine, so-called storm, that directly attacks your cells and prevents oxygenation, we notice that that is the same between Omicron and between Delta, and that is a significant thing. So no matter what anybody is telling you, they're both equally as dangerous. Let's go to the last slide. Okay.
Can we, Dr. Maxey, are you going to go back up to the viral load slide?
Go back.
I just wanted you to not skip this one.
Okay. Hey, would you read that then?
I'm happy to, because it's something that I talk to folks about. Viral loads were similar in samples from Omicron and Delta infected patients, regardless of vaccination status. And the next bullet is the recovery of infectious virus on cell culture was reduced in samples from patients infected with Delta who received a booster dose, which was not the case with Omicron. In Omicron infected individuals, the recovery of infectious virus was equivalent in unvaccinated.
That's a significant statement. So is this saying that one was more affected by the vaccination than the other? As in one evaded the vaccination more. This to me is saying that Omicron was not as affected by the vaccine as was the Delta. And that was my point with Dr.
And I don't think this makes that point, actually, because I think what this is saying is that the amount of virus recovered, which this statement is saying was more actually in the Omicron individual that was vaccinated, compared to, or when you take that with the previous statements that people who are vaccinated tend to get less sick with Omicron if they wind up in the hospital even, does not mean that the vaccine, you cannot then say that the vaccine was not effective. Because the endpoint, I come back to the endpoint of the vaccine was not to prevent infection. The endpoint of the vaccine was to mitigate the disease.
So when I see information like this, that is not stuff that I can understand when I was in the 3rd grade at Santa Barbara Avenue Elementary School in LA, I always ask myself, what are they trying to tell me? Okay, I think, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I think what they're trying to tell me is whether you're vaccinated or not, the virus can get in your nose and and so you can have a high viral load, and that can happen whether you're vaccinated or not. What I'm getting from this is that viral load matters a lot. Being vaccinated matters more. So the virus is somebody's going to breathe in my face. I'm going to get a whole bunch of virus in me. But if I'm vaccinated, despite the fact that I may have just as much infectious virus in me, and we know viral load matters. If you get a little tiny bit of virus or a lot of virus, it matters in terms of how your body is impacted by that virus. But if I'm vaccinated, I may get just as high a viral load, but I have a better chance of not getting as sick as someone who is unvaccinated. Now, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, you help me. Am I understanding that in my
yeah, you're definitely breaking it down, as we used to say. And I'm going to take it a step further, but we gotta recognize we violated our policy. We've been talking about viral load, and we didn't define viral load, and we had a question about that in chat. So, you want to define viral load?
I'm going to define it the way I understand it. It's just the amount of virus that hits you that you have that we can measure. Because anyway, that's what I got. I don't want to go further than that. You tell me if we need to have more than that.
I think that's a good way to think of it. And I want to use, you know me, I like the practical. And since we're on viral load and transmissibility and all of that, I want to use the case study of what's going on in Washington, D.C. to illustrate the point that I want to make, which is when you've got a high level of disease in the community that you live in, which is why you have to know what's going on in your neck of the woods at all times. You need to do the things we've been talking about for 2 years now on how to protect yourself, starting with not going in the big crowds. But if you're going to go into the big crowd, then you need to be wearing your mask. Now, what am I alluding to? I've been watching this play out with some interest because I, like probably everybody, have impending engagements or invitations coming up in the next few weeks or months that involve either travel and or attendance at meetings. And I have been very concerned about what's going on in using that information to help me to make my decisions about this. So as you know, a few weeks ago, they had the Gridiron Dinner where a lot of Washington big shots went, and quite a few of them got sick. Now, then we had the Correspondents' Dinner that Dr. Maxey mentioned a few minutes ago. And there was a lot of conversation last week about whether or not the president would go, because there is still a very high level of COVID in the DC area. And then to put the cherry on top of the Sunday was Dr. Fauci saying, y'all can go if you want to, but I am making a personal assessment of risk for me, and I'm not going. So that all played out in the press, but I thought it was a really good lesson for everybody to learn.
And let me just add to that. I love Dr. Rhonda Johnson because she'll take my third grade explanation and continue to make it plain, but also make it more comprehensive. And so I'm going to read it, what's in the chat. Dr. Johnson put in, your viral load is simply, I love that word so much. Your viral load is simply how much virus you have in your body. In medical terms, it refers to how much virus is measured in a standard volume of fluid. The higher your viral load, the more virus you have in your body. So thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Can we unmute her a moment? I'd love her to comment. Dr. Rhonda Johnson?
Yes, hi. I want to just say it's easier for me to put things in the chat because I can do research while you guys are talking. So I don't want to act like I have all the answers. I'm able to research while you all are talking. and help answer the questions in the chat. That's what I try to do.
Well,
So-
thank you so much. Let me see if I can simplify. I'm trying to play like I'm Ivan Walks for a minute. Does it mean there's a viral load like getting hit by one truck versus two trucks? Will it make you more flat if you're hit by two?
Yes,
And I can,
yes. I'll defer to the expert, whoever was speaking.
Who was that? Who was that speaking beside Dr. Johnson?
That was Dr. Gibson.
Dr. Gibson, you had a comment?
yes, I apologize to the good doctor for interrupting, but we can make reference to, and I'm so glad she mentioned that she was doing research simultaneously, the multitasking that some of us really, really avoid. But we should make that our active part of what we do all the time. We could use WebMD, a very familiar website, and it'll tell you viral load is simply the amount of virus doctors can find in your body. They might use blood, nasal swabs, or the bodily fluids to test the load of a particular virus. In this case, we're talking about the coronavirus. And it's important for us to remember those points that were taught to us by the inimitable Dr. Jordan Despani when he talked about mutation. That one is where everything gets very, very, very tricky, because then we're in that part of medicine that is so difficult to teach, because it's so difficult to keep up with, because people are getting exposed because of the lack of vaccinated population. That's why epigenetics and the whole issue of global public health is so crucial. And I'm so happy to hear Dr. B talk about that earlier. We must recognize that right now, as we speak, there is a lockdown in Shanghai, China. That's not too far from Wuhan, China, which is the nest, the birthplace, the Bethlehem of COVID-19. So please, let's do what Dr. Ivan Walks instructed us to do, is do your homework, look it up, keep up, because you keep up with everything else. It's really very easy to go to WebMD, to go to your most favorite search engine. And I use startpage.com because they search all the search engines, and you can get robust information, easy to understand. You pick your choice.
What's the name of that engine you use?
Startpage.com. It's a meta search engine. It searches all the other search engines and bring you back a meta response, which is more robust.
Okay, very good. And thank you, Dr. Rhonda Johnson, as well as Dr. Gibson. Simon, can you go to the one that says data again? There's a little bit I think we can unpack on this, I believe. So on the sentence that starts with, yet we show that Omicron is associated with more infections in fully booster vaccinated individuals, likely due to immune evasion. It's also important to note that the total number of admissions were higher, and that admitted patients didn't show a statistically significant difference in the use of supplemental oxygen or ICU level care, meaning that once you're sick, you're very sick, as was said by Dr. Walsh before. But the highlight of this importance was taking the infection control precautions and raising the awareness that Omicron infection should not be underestimated. And I believe that's the key thing, that just because they say it's less dangerous is not less dangerous. It is equally as dangerous if you get sick. So we need to take all those precautions. But I want to make one other point. If we go back to our first two slides, in the No More Mr. Nice Guy, that where we talk about America's frontline doctors, and it says SG, MD, JD. These people of the frontline doctors telling you not to get vaccinated are the same people who are hooked up with the Oath Keepers who've been convicted of sedition, the same people who raided the Capitol on January the 6th. Is one big cabal of people who don't mean well for Black people at all. I'm putting them all in the same thing of attempting to decrease the wellness of communities of color. And I'm considering them, and I'm trying to modulate my words because Dr. Walks is on, enemies of our people, all of them, whether they're Black, whether they're white. And I believe they have a certain amount of enmity towards our communities, and we have to stand up to them, and we have to up our game. And any other points that we need to discuss that are in the chat, or any questions, any other discussion to my co-moderators and other?
I would like Dr. Maxey to respond to something that is in the chat, and I don't know exactly what the person's name is because it's from Fire Tablet. But I do think that when someone raises questions for us, we need to at least respect the question, whether we agree with the implication or not. And the first thing that was put in by Fire Tablet referenced the 75-year protection order for the pharmaceutical industry. And I think that that's a reference to the fact that somehow it indicates that the pharmaceutical industry maybe shouldn't be trusted, or maybe because they have this protection order of some kind that we should be suspicious of what they're giving us in terms of the vaccine. And I think the question I'm taking from that is, should we be suspicious of the pharmaceutical industry and therefore the vaccine? And at the risk of being controversial, my response is absolutely. We should be suspicious anytime somebody is doing something that is making a whole bunch of money, and then they're coming and telling us we should do this. So because of our righteous suspicion, we've documented the fact that Kizzmekia Corbett was involved in helping to make the vaccine. We documented that the National Medical Association has been involved in evaluating what the FDA was involved in, and looking at was involved in evaluating, and looking at all of that, how it came down. And the Black Health Trust put together its own vaccine subcommittee to look at these things. So yes, we should be suspicious, and we are, rightfully so. And so we look at those things. The second point that came out of Fire Tablet, and again, these are things we need to pay attention to because they're legitimate questions, is I'm reading the statement as such: Omicron vaccinated and boosted have the same recovery as an unvaccinated person. So if that's what's being taken from the data that Dr. Maxey has put together, maybe you could say if you've got two people who get to the ICU and one is unvaccinated and one is vaccinated, they need the same amount of oxygen. Okay, that's what the data shows. But you know what? If you are fully vaccinated and boosted, you have a much better chance of never getting to the ICU. And so I think that we have to look at the data, and we can take data and make it say whatever we want. But I don't read this data as saying that, oh, because the oxygen needs are the same if you get to the ICU, that somehow being unvaccinated is okay. That's not what I'm reading. And the last point I want to make quickly is there's a question, again, from Fire Tablet, which I think is wonderful that these questions are being raised. And the question is, why is only one narrative being taught in this forum? Because there are reputable doctors that discuss the natural immunity without vaccines. Let me say this about that, and then I'm going to be quiet. We have had many conversations in this forum about natural immunity and about things that boost natural immunity. On this program earlier, I talked about that handful of pills I take that includes my extra zinc and my extra vitamin C and all. I am a big fan of natural immunity, and I'll go beyond that. I tell people all the time that one of the best things you can do to be ready in case you get infected is be as healthy as possible and have a healthy pair of lungs and have your body ready to fight off whatever's coming for it, whether it's diabetes, hypertension, or coronavirus. The healthier you can be and the stronger your immune system is, the better off you are. So I take issue with the statement that why is only one narrative being taught in this forum? That is not the case. And if you go back through the archives of the Black Health Trust, you will see many, many programs that really talk about the importance of our natural immunity and maximizing our natural ability to fight against all the things that come after us. And then on top of that, because we've done the research, because we've been suspicious, because we don't believe everybody who tells us, here, I'm here coming to help you with this, and we've done our own research, we also advocate that you talk to your practitioner and you strongly consider getting vaccinated and getting boosted. I'm
Dr.
vaccinated and
Walsh,
boosted.
I think that was
Great
so,
idea.
but I want to add on top of it. And I want to say a few things. And this is not a religious show or a church show, but not only do I believe in natural immunity, but I believe in supernatural immunity. And every morning at 3 o'clock, I'm up praying for my supernatural immunity to God Almighty, for myself, my family, and my communities. And as Dr. Walk said, we spent a lot of time speaking about how to help your natural immunity along with your levels of vitamin D, with micronutrients and with nutrition, et cetera, all of which is very important, which is also why we turned the corner recently and start talking about not just COVID-19, but also about health disparities, which are in large part fueled by the fact that in general, we know that a large percentage of our community are overweight, which puts us at a problem that our rate of diabetes is high, our rate of high blood pressure is high, our rate of cardiac disease is high. All sorts of things make us more vulnerable. And whether you like it or not, that is true. But in addition, on this particular program, I want to call out that there are not plenty of reputable doctors that are pushing ivermectin, that are pushing hydroxychloroquine. I'm telling you now that they are no longer considered reputable in my mind, in the mind of this program, in the mind of the National Medical Association, American Medical Association, and we need to call a spade a spade. They're selling hogwash and death, and they are not reputable. I don't care what they say and who you say, and if that makes you not want to look at this program, that's okay. We are telling you the truth. We're telling you the truth as we have studied it, and it is vetted information, as Dr. Neighbor-Stevens said before. We follow the science, and science is a dynamic thing that may change from point to point as we improve our research base and our knowledge base. So any of these doctors who claim that they have the answer with ivermectin, they're uninvited. And I do not think they're reputable, period.
If I may, Dr. Maxey.
Yes.
I'll see you and Dr. Ivan Walker, Dr. Ivan Walk's comments, because they're both very, very, very relevant to the current situation. Now, there probably is a lot of speculation about the kind of value that could be had in the immunity that people who actually experience infection by COVID-19 enjoy. Now, I say enjoy with tongue in cheek because who knows, who's to say that you won't end up with hospitalization and death. That's where those vaccinations that Dr. Walks talk about and that you talk about, that we all talk about on this particular forum, come in so handy, because just as stated by Dr. V earlier, they won't prevent infection, but they're highly proven to be effective in preventing hospitalization and death. Remember to talk to your healthcare professional. Speak to the pharmacist. You can walk in and talk to them without an appointment, believe it or not. And you can call them up and they'll answer the phone and talk to you about the questions that you have. But we all have to, and I can't say it enough, take personal responsibility for our health. And by that, I mean, get good exercise. Make sure you take those supplements that Dr. Walks talks about, and make sure that you prevent those ailments that cause so much of the vulnerability that Dr. Maxey refers to, the diabetes, the hypertension, the cardiovascular disease. That means taking good care of yourself, just the same as if you were an elite athlete up for the NFL draft this weekend. I rest.
So, Dr. Maxey, let me just make one more comment. You guys know, I have never met an argument that I didn't enjoy. I love debate. As my mother told me when I was a little kid, she said, if two people agree on everything, one of them is not needed. But let me say this. We had another little comment, and I know how hard it is to be here every Sunday afternoon. I really do. But let me just say, the individual who wrote, "Doctor, you misunderstood my comment. You've all spoken about natural immunity. However," and this is the thing, this is the assumption, "why have you not invited these opposing doctors to contribute information?" I want to say to my brother or sister who put that in, yes, we have. We've had conversations on Sundays about this on the Black Health Trust. We've had conversations about this on Wednesday at the advisory committee that's primarily for the doctor people to be on Wednesdays. We've talked about this, and I know you have missed some of those. I respect that, because it's hard to be here every Sunday. But I would just encourage you to when you have a comment like that, to ask it, and to ask, have you invited opposing doctors to contribute information? Because we've had them on to speak, and we've debated the whole ivermectin, don't take the vaccine, we've debated all of that for what, Dr. Maxey, a couple of years now? So yeah. We love you. We want you to come on. We want you to listen. We're happy for you to be here. And I want you to maybe take some time and look back through the archives, so you continue to hold us accountable for looking at all the sides of the argument.
Let me add this. Our mission on our Sunday program is not to present debate. Our mission is to present what we consider vetted information following science and research. We open our Wednesday night to our physicians and scientists of all views, and that's where we have our debates about what we can present to our listening audience, which is largely lay. And I insist that we do not present unvetted information on Sundays to an audience that may get the wrong idea. But we are open to debate, and we have that on our Wednesdays. And we make that limited to people who are either scientists or physicians, and we can open that up to anybody we want. But to a larger audience that's going all over the country and internationally, we want to make sure that we have a basis of what we present. But I want to go back to something else about the pharmaceutical firms and about the whole issue of capitalism. This is a capitalistic country, but there's not a lot of difference in my mind politically between capitalists, communists, and any other ism that you want. It's all about the survival of whoever considers himself running the world or the country. But just because a pharmaceutical company wants to rip you off doesn't mean that the penicillin isn't good for you when you have a strep throat. And we have to not get confused with letting ourselves die because a criminal is giving you penicillin. That may not be a good analogy. But there are problems that we need to solve, and we will have soon, hopefully, some members of the Black Congressional Caucus, some members of the clergy, to discuss the political aspects of why our country is that it is, why Big Pharma is what it is, but don't get it twisted. There's some things that the pharmaceutical industry does. They make good drugs. They're cleared by the FDA, even though we have questions about that in CDC. If something is going to save your life in the short run, don't not take it because of the ignorance of what they really mean. I guarantee you that most of you don't know what's in the baking powder you get from Kroger's or what's in the soup that you get from Whole Foods. Why are you so concerned about what's in the well-vetted vaccine made by Pfizer? And I tried to be funny a few weeks ago and said that if a company is good enough to make a drug that can wake the dead called Viagra, they're good enough to make something to save the living, and that's Pfizer. But we have to be careful about what prevents us from being safe.
Dr. Maxey, I'm gonna let you find a way to leave that joke alone. But anyway, one of the questions in the chat was about the machine I referenced that I have in my home to clean the air. It is not an air filtering machine, and I know Mr. Dorsey is on, and I would ask Mr. Dorsey to put the information about that machine in the chat. Dr. Despani had vetted the machine and talked to us about the effectiveness of that particular machine. And I read it and I talked to Dr. Despani. I listened to Dr. Despani. I got the machine in my house and I did not get the COVID. And so I'm one of those people that believes it has been tested. And as far as I'm concerned, it worked for me. So and I see Mr. Dorsey did put the information in. So whoever asked the question, thank you for that.
Can we unmute him for a minute? Can we unmute Mr. Dorsey?
While we're unmuting Mr. Dorsey, once again, I just want to comment on what Dr. Rhonda Johnson put in the chat. Dr. Johnson, thank you. You are absolutely on point about how critical it is that we respect the tragedy that has been the impact of COVID-19 on our community, the impact on the life expectancy, the impact on the families, not only from a health perspective, but economically, socially. It's been huge. So thank you for putting that in the chat. Mr. Dorsey.
Yes, sir. Hello, Black Health Trust. How are you all today? The information on the NASA-based technology is in the chat. One of the things that I had neglected to mention is that it is FDA cleared as a Class 2 medical device. It has been in the Cleveland Clinic in 50 of their surgery rooms for over 2.5 years. There is a 40-second video that gives you graphic, visual of how the system works. And please don't overlook surfaces. This is the only technology that is in the Space Technology Hall of Fame, one of 75 technologies in that Hall of Fame, but it is the only purification system in the Hall of Fame. It's currently on the space station. It was developed by NASA for that use. And that's about it. There is an article in there from the AP talking of, I'm sorry?
I'm saying, did you take one to the Washington Hilton last night for the presidential dinner?
It was a little too peoply for me.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. I appreciate it. And Mr. Dorsey has a relationship with the Black Health Trust that's longstanding, and he has pledged a portion of his sales to the Black Health Trust. So that would help us a lot. But more than that, like Dr. Walk says, I have one for my family as well. and it is something well worth it, and you should look into it if you're so moved.
Dr.
do
Maxey,
you-
may I add an additional endorsement for Mr. Dorsey's product?
Yes.
The FDA acknowledgement of his product, that's very, very powerful. That's not unlike the kind of FDA emergency use authorization and the other authorizations that we count on from the Food and Drug Administration. So that lends a whole different level of credibility, and it speaks to the kind of thing that Fire Tablet is concerned about and other people who are on not just this particular session, but all those sessions I invite everyone to go to at blackhealthtrust.org. Thank you. I'll rest.
Okay. So we're at the hour where Dr. Neighbor is going to pull the plug on us. So let me be ahead of the game. Are there any other comments from our moderators on the issues of the day that we discussed? Dr. Walks?
Dr. Maxey, I don't have any other comments. Thank you for leading us again in another good Black Health Trust. The one thing I will say is, I know that Dr. Maxey, this is not the forum for controversy. At the same time, I like questions. I like being questioned. I like the fact that we can answer questions. I like the fact that we have been thorough in vetting the information. And so we're not afraid of folks asking us tough questions. So I enjoy that part of what we do, giving people a place to come with their concerns and being able to give them good information.
Yeah, before I go to Dr. Neighbor, I'm going to ask some of our other advisory board members. Dr. Gibson has commented. Dr. Steiner, you're on. You have a word?
While Dr. Steiner is being unmuted, his presentation about having a plan for your family was so fabulous. I really appreciate that kind, as Dr. Neighbor Stevens says, practical advice that we can use. Sorry, Dr. Steiner, go ahead, man.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you. Just a couple of words from me relevant to today's discussion, which I always enjoy. A lot of people are still skeptical of these vaccines. I hear it daily. And my answer to them is, it's the best we have. They're not perfect. They're effective. And from a risk-benefit award, there's nothing that can stand in its shoes out there. And as far as ivermectin, which I was over someone's house the other day, and it was sitting there on their table, and they were so proud of it. And I said, have you read the recent multi-center study by the New England Journal of Medicine, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which they haven't. And unfortunately, the media isn't pushing this enough to show that the horse medicine is not effective. Its manufacturer says it's not effective. And, yet people are still, reaching for it. And one other comment I wanted to make is these frontline doctors, if you follow the money, and me and Dr. Nabrit have had long discussions about this, you can read it in Fortune magazine and in Forbes, who followed the doctors who set up a telemedicine company to push ivermectin. They have made each one tens of millions of dollars each. So, this is the genesis of these types of things. It's all about the money, and it's not about the good of the people. I wish we had something better. We have some great things coming on the horizon, but for now, let's all be vaccinated. And thank you for a few moments, and thank you for today, as always.
Dr. Neighbor, any of our other medical advisory on the phone? On the call?
Dr. Dickerson has his hand up.
Mr. Dickerson? You unmute him?
He's unmuted. Go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I listened to the doctors talk about the vaccination, and from a layman's point of view, I think we should engage into the vaccination because I have gotten the booster shots and they all
Disguised
seem
people.
to work. And
No.
they have air purification system that Mr. Walsh, Dr. Walsh talked about. That works as well. So I think that we should definitely try those pieces of the equipment.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is Mr. Brooks on? Mr. Carl Brooks. Can you unmute Mr. Brooks? I'd like a comment from him. We're just got a few more seconds. Is he able to be unmuted?
Yes.
There he is.
Hello, Mr. Brooks. I didn't invite a comment from you. Mr. Brooks is a former president of Executive Leadership Council.
Randall,
You're on two devices, Mr. Brooks.
yeah. Is that better?
I think so.
The wealth of information provided by the Black Health Trust is unprecedented in terms of our community. We got access to the baddest brothers and sisters in the medical fields, and we got to take advantage of it. I think that these unproven requests for us to evaluate and test something that hasn't been tested and fully vested is a waste of time. We got to stick to what we know, and the information from Black Health Trust is the best and brightest information that we can get.
Thank you. Dr. Neighbors-Stevens, any final comment? Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Well, my final comments today are, one, make sure that you do your own personal assessment of risk for serious illness and act accordingly. In order to try to stay safe, avoid big crowds, especially indoor big crowds. Wear a mask if you're going to be in a crowd. And as we recommend, get vaccinated and get the boosters as have been recommended by the CDC.
Thank you very much. And I greatly, greatly appreciate collaborating with Dr. Neighbors-Stevens and Dr. Ivan Walks and Dr. Hines and all of our other members of our medical advisory. And hopefully we'll have a medical advisory meeting coming up in the next week or so. We're doing some administrative improvements. I also like to announce that we have a newest board member in Dr. Ivan Walks, and we welcome his joining us at the board level, and he's working with us on some exciting issues. So thank everybody for joining us and participating. Have a wonderful and safe rest of your day. Have a good day.
Day, everyone.
Bye-bye.